From the great halls of their house, there are assembled three who hope to one day be the world's greatest driving heroes. Created from the cosmic legends of the universe comes our team captain, the Vision, Bill Fisher. There's soon-to-be Wonder Woman, Vicky Fisher. Our Captain Marvel and head flight trainee, Jennifer Scripchuk. And our Batman, the master of tools, gadgets, and all things mechanical, our mild-mannered soon-to-be billionaire, Alan Danvers. Their mission, to fight injustice, share what is right and wrong, to get you out of your house and come out racing with them and serve all mankind. They are the Garage Heroes in Training Team.
Welcome to the Garage Heroes in Training Podcast. I am the only host who showed up today. My name's Bill. We have a guest. Our guest has been on before. He is the host of the Your Data Driven podcast. Former race engineer, now entrepreneur, athletic coach, part-time amateur driver enthusiast, Samir Abid. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Bill.
How you doing?
Thanks for having me back.
Well, you know, we only let the good ones come back. And you were definitely a good one on the first trip through. So we wanted to have you back. And I think we had an outline that I shared with you. And I think we got through about 20% of it. And we're going to get through, maybe 5 or 6 more percent because I added to it. I'm sorry. You have so much good stuff in that brain of yours. I want to get it out so people understand. And you do a great job with your website.
Yeah.
So sharing and giving. But just in case somebody missed our earlier podcast, which they shouldn't, and hopefully they'll go back. And just in case they aren't familiar with you, could you give a little brief background on yourself?
Sure. Thanks again for that little intro. It's lovely to be back. Just us two today.
Just us.
Hopefully we'll cover some good ground. For the benefit of people who don't know me, who didn't listen to the last one, I'm Samir Abid. I'm a race engineer, driver coach, vehicle dynamics specialist. Really, from that background, and these days I build online courses and templates and host a podcast all around motorsport, trying to bring that professional insight to the amateur or the enthusiast racer who does racing or track days or sim racing, and so that's me really in a nutshell.
Every time somebody says in a nutshell, I always get that picture from Austin Powers of him rolling around. Anyway.
It's unusual, and so the other point being is that it's unusual and always extremely uncomfortable for me to be on the other side of the microphone. I'd much rather be sat in your shoes asking the questions, as anyone who's listened to my show would attest.
Yes.
Be kind, and I will do my best to help.
Well, don't think it's lost on me. I notice whenever we have you on that you always turn the question back to me answering the question. So I've noticed it's okay. I just let you have the guest prerogative to do as you wish, since it is your podcast when you're with us. So your podcast is Your Data Driven. I think your website's equally titled, and most of your information that you share comes through there. And I definitely recommend anybody who's listening to go look at it, because you have lots of stuff for sale, but you've got a tremendous amount of stuff that's just available for free. And it's definitely some worthwhile information. But since in the title of your podcast is data, I thought we'd spend just a touch on data, not only the data to collect, but what to do to look at the data and what to do once you have the data to make it fruitful and worthwhile to actually spend the time or spend the effort, or in some cases spend the money on the equipment, because data is kind of this big nebulous concept of, well, I got all this stuff, but if you don't ever do anything with it, you've wasted a lot of time and energy and money. And everybody should have limits on all of those, although some people treat it like they don't, but that's bad choices on their part. But let's get a little bit into the data and the data usage, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, since you said yes to the podcast, I figured it was okay, but I, got to be polite. So once you have, well, let's go back with just a concept, so just everybody's on the same page. If you were to define the data for racing, what would you define the data as a non-nebulous concept? And then are there layers to the data, like start with the basics and then work your way up, or just jump in the pool and get wet?
Yeah, it's a good place to start, to be honest, because like don't assume that everyone thinks about data in the same way. Yes, it is sitting in front of a laptop, but it's also notes that you make yourself.
Hmm.
It's also, information that you're getting to put your performance into context.
Hmm.
So the lap time is a piece of data, and if you're racing or you're competing or you're trying to get quicker, that is where you're going to want to focus. You're going to, how do I judge whether I'm a better driver than you in the same car? Well, we look at the lap time, and that's
Hmm.
the first piece of data. But that lap time also needs to be put into context as well. So, like, well, did you have the same car?
Right.
Were the conditions the same? All this sort of stuff. And then so
Tires.
you start, yes, exactly, tires, the wonderful subject of tires, and so it's really important to first work out like what it is that you're really talking about when it comes to data.
Hmm.
Quite often people are looking at logged data. So this is stuff that they buy a data logger and it's got sensors on it with
Hmm.
acceleration and speed and it will give them their time and stuff like that, and then you can
Right.
analyze that. So yeah, the first thing is to really just be happy that you've got a clear understanding of what data is.
So I guess really early in my racing career, well, actually, I was racing before I started practicing or learning how to race, which is probably a bad choice on our part, but it was a lot of fun. I think it was my first HPDE that I went to that had an instructor in the car. There was actually some data that I gathered from just driving with them. I went out and I drove one stint. There were 20-minute stints. I know HPDs are far into European, but someday we'll get you guys to have one, or you can come over and play with one of ours. That would be great.
Hmm.
Post Blake.
Love to. Yeah.
Um, so we went out in my car, and it was a track that I knew, and my instructor was a friend, and he knew the track as well. And then we went out in my car with him driving. And to me, that was my first actual use of data beyond the lap time, because it was, oh, my car can do that. I didn't know. I
Yeah.
didn't know. I thought I knew what threshold braking was. I thought I knew what, the limit going around turn, pick a number, it doesn't matter for example's sake. But seeing and feeling and experiencing it was, in essence, my first exposure personally of data beyond lap time. And sometimes I think people will miss out on some of the simpler things where you don't have to have a full data system collecting everything. You can actually just right seat or left seat with people in the car, and that gives you an aspect of the data, I think, that's pretty valuable in some cases, especially early.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's the important thing with any of this is to have a clear idea of what's the problem you're trying to solve. You
Hmm.
know, and if you start with that
Hmm.
and then work backwards, and then well, what can you do to solve your problem? So in your case, it's like, well, I've never been on a track before.
Hmm.
I don't really know what I don't know about
Yep.
how to drive quickly. I've driven around thinking I'm okay, yeah, and then this other fella's got in the car, driven my same car, and demonstrated actually there's more here than I realised. I didn't even know that was a thing to learn. So the challenge there is how do you get up to speed on a track, and your solution has been to put the data in the sense of like having someone who knows what they're doing or more experienced than you, sort of thing.
Yeah, it definitely helped. And
And then but then you carry that on. So it's really important to always, I think, to have this clear problem that you're trying to solve. So, like, are you trying to qualify on pole, or are you trying to validate a
mm,
change that you've made to the car? Are you
hmm
trying to work out a particular what problem is it in on the track that you're really looking to solve,
hmm
and then you start to think, right, well, what data can I use to help me inform that,
sure.
rather than sometimes a situation of I haven't thought it through properly, or you don't really know,
Yeah.
and you kind of you put some technology or you put something there that is, and then look for sort of the problem for it to solve, if that makes sense. So
Mm-hmm.
everyone else is doing it, so well we should do it too. But you don't really know why
Or how, you know.
well or how. Yeah, and so it's a kind of like a chicken and egg, isn't it, in a
Mm-hmm.
way. So hopefully, yeah, some of the conversation that we can have now can give you an
Yeah.
idea of like the kind of things that people could, the problems that people could use data for, to help them solve the challenges that they have on the track.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think the fundamental thing that everybody thinks about when racing is the lap time, right? The lap time.
Yeah.
It's kind of the end all be all, the arbiter of who wins and who doesn't in time trial, especially.
Yeah.
But as you start to go, I always think of them as layers. Since we're doing Mike Myers references, we'll go to Shrek, and we're talking about ogres now. The layers. You can break the lap time into sectors, which is kind of like the next step ish, I think.
Yeah, little mini bits of lap. Yeah,
right. You know, so you could actually, I think you could I don't know, maybe you disagree. I think you can actually over sectorize yourself and get to the point where you don't actually, they're not helping you.
well, and so not to sort of moan about the software that's available to most people, but the way in which it auto creates sectors is particularly confusing, in my humble opinion, such that you end up with way too many sectors. But what is the problem you're trying to solve? You know, do you want to have a number on a laptop that is faster than the lap record? Well, honestly, if you put pretty average lap and you put enough sectors into it, or a pretty average session, you put enough sectors into it, you're going to get pretty close, I imagine. But that doesn't really help. You don't want the fastest laptop. You want the fastest car on the track, don't you? So the sectors. What is the purpose of the sector? Well, it's to try and divide up the parts of the track that you're doing well and the parts of the track that you've got an opportunity to improve on. Because a lap time is too broad. There's too much that can happen in a lap, assuming you've got more than 4 or 5, braking events, different corners going on. There's too many times for things to go wrong, as it were. So the idea of the sector is so you chop it up and you say, well, these are the bits that I'm doing pretty well, and then these are the bits I'm not, doing so well, and try and isolate it in that way. But you need to do it in a meaningful chunk. So I like on a lap that's sort of at maybe a minute and a half long, I wouldn't have more than sort of 3 or 4, maybe 5 sectors in it. A good way, if you're looking to do it yourself, a good way to do it in actual fact is to look at areas where you're braking quite heavily and chop it up in that way. So normally on a lap there's sort of 4 or 5 major braking events, and they can form your sectors. So just from a very practical point of view, that's how you can do that. And then it's like, okay, you don't want to cut a sector in the middle of a corner because there's too much, that's the variability piece. You want to cut a sector when there's not really much going on, so that it's going to be really consistent.
So if you were to manually set up a sector, would you be setting it up at just before the heavy braking, or just after?
Yeah, just before it.
Just before.
So you want to capture the bit. You want to capture the heavy braking bit, but sometimes you're not always going to brake at the same point.
Right.
So you want to sort of roll it back a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. So somewhere along the straight, but just before your heavy braking point.
Okay.
And that can give you like a really good rule of thumb, starting point for getting into stuff. And what's nice is that you end up capturing meaningful chunks of the track. So if you've got like a chicane or something, you're not cutting sectors all the way through the middle of the corner, left and right, which is what the auto systems do. That every time you go left or right or get to the end of a straight, it chops it all up in those really strange places. And you want to avoid that. You want to be chopping it at a point where you're not really doing much in the car other than accelerating as hard as you can. And you want to capture the activity bits so that you can then compare them.
So a lot of the let's pretend that somebody decides that data is important enough, and they bought some piece of equipment. A lot of the standard metrics that the equipments will collect are your lap time, your sector time. And I think the next layer would be like the speed at a point and maybe the lat G long G. Is that the next level if you wanted to get deeper into it?
Yeah, there's the first thing that you normally get is a speed trace. So this is a trace of like how fast you've gone around the lap.
Right?
Yeah, so at different points around the track, you can say, well, I was doing 100 miles an hour or whatever. But and it's interesting because not many people give that. They sort of look at it, give it a cursory look, and then sort of go off to dive into other things. But there's actually a fantastic amount of information that you can get just from the speed trace alone. So before looking at accelerations or anything like that, that's the place to start. The shape of that curve can give you an idea of, for example, how well you're getting onto the brakes. Surprisingly, how consistent you're being through the corners. If you put 3 or 4 laps, your 3 or 4 fastest laps together, and normally in the software you can overlay those. And then I do this. I got my kids to, when I did the course, I was trying to do a lesson on this sort of consistency thing, and I actually got my kids to look at the slide and say, right, can you actually tell the difference here? And we call it the Squint Test. So basically, you get 3 or 4 laps, you overlay them, and then just squint. And where they overlay 100%, you're consistent, and where they're not, there's inconsistency, and that's the bit to start looking at. And normally that is in the middle of a corner. So just start there, and then so again, the question is, it's like, what's going on? Yeah, your first thing is like, what's going on? So your the pain you want to know, or the problem you're trying to solve is like, what happened? And then so the data's sort of starting to tell you, and then the next part of the puzzle, once you've got an idea of what actually happened, is to then jump to, well, why? And then once you've got an idea of why, then you can think of, well, in my driving, how can I do something different about that? But it's really important, in my experience, to sort of separate these things out. And quite often, we jump to the solutions before we really understand what really happened out there. So the nice thing about the data, it does give you this objective message, of what happened, but also the driver's feelings, quite important. And so you want to meld these two together and say, well, this corner is really good and this one's really inconsistent. So you go to the driver and say, what's going on? Engineers make the mistake of assuming what's going on. But if you're the driver, or you can ask yourself, or if you're working with someone, you can ask them. So, well, before we start throwing solutions here, let's actually figure out what's going on. Are you unsure? Do you know the line? Is there something about this particular corner? Is a car behaving in a way that you're not happy with? Was there traffic on these laps? What is actually going on this information before we get to solutions?
So I think with the amount of time we have, which means you're coming back, we should probably stay at this depth level, because we could stay here and we could talk multiple hours, and we've got a limited amount of time. I've only got so much tape in my machine. But I think your point is valid, in that you can spend, we could probably spend 2 or 3 hours just talking about the shape of the speed trace and what you want it to be and how you tell differences.
Well, so the reason I made the point about the speed trace is because it does often get overlooked quite quickly. And the reason it gets overlooked quite quickly is that whilst it does give you an idea of what's going on, the fidelity and the depth of the information it's quite hard to pick out. So yeah, we've identified, well, this is an area that you're struggling with, but it's not really, it is telling you why, but it's not obvious. So the next step, the next layer down, is to sort of look at the accelerations, which is the change in speed, either of your lateral speed or your longitudinal speed. And because why that's useful is it's basically the gradient of that speed trace. And so you start to look at the shape of that curve from an acceleration point of view, and it starts to unpick things. And you say, oh, actually, look at your heel and toe here on the downshift.
Yeah.
You're dropping into a second gear corner from flat out on the straight, and you're heel and toeing, which is great because you're saving your engine and doing all that sort of nice stuff. But what's actually happening, or what we can see in this longitudinal trace is that because you're blipping the throttle and doing all sort of foot gymnastics, you're actually coming off the brake momentarily while you blip the throttle, and then you're going back on again, and that's slower. So than if you're on it all the time. And so there's our first opportunity. It's like, well, if I'm looking at that acceleration trace, what is it I'm looking for? It's like, well, how good are your downshifts?
So looking at a speed trace, which is, again, it's the speed versus the distance on the track. Usually it's at full scale, it's one width of this graph is the track length, and then your velocities on the vertical axis. I always look at, and I'm not sure I'm doing it 100% right. I hope I am. I always look at
As a graduate of my course, I hope you're doing it right.
Well, I know I do it a lot better, but 100% is a tough grade. I always look at not only the velocity min and velocity max, but the slopes and the shapes. And a lot of people will especially at braking events, they'll look at the shape and look for whether the turn is a V shape, meaning the speed decreases smoothly and then increases smoothly, or if it kind of rounds at the bottom. And is there a good reason why people should care about that?
So the tricky thing is it kind of depends on your corner a little bit. So so if it's a heavy, what we call a threshold braking corner, so you're braking at full your full capacity in a straight line into a hairpin or something like that,
right.
then this kind of V shape is certainly something you would look for. But again, the next step on from that is the acceleration. So if you look at the longitudinal acceleration, which is effectively the same as the slope of that curve, just in a different chart, you can then start to pick out, okay, well, I'm decelerating at this peak number, and then I'm going to come off the brakes, and then I'm going to be accelerating in a nice smooth way. And so what you're talking about there, on a corner that should be quite a V, if it's nice and rolled underneath, then perhaps you're not hitting that maximum braking threshold that your car can do. And quite often, if you're new to the track, you won't do that, because it's just not something you do on the road unless you have an emergency situation, and you're just not used to doing it. So you'll feel as if, we're flying through the corner, but in actual fact, there's a lot more capacity to brake in your car, and that's what this thing's looking at. The whole time with this analysis and all this data of your driving and everything, all we're trying to do is work out, like, how much of the capacity of the car are you getting out as a driver. And so these kind of ideas of the V's and the roll, all this sort of different things that people look at, is all with an idea of, how much lap time have you left on the table, basically, by not getting the most out of your car. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does, but it leads me to something where we could spend easily 2 hours. There's going to be this argument. The argument that you hear, and I don't think it's 100% on either side of the argument, but you should always be braking at your maximum and accelerating at your maximum, versus you should perhaps brake a little earlier and have the car more stable and set up for the turn.
Well, so let's break that down. That down. What is your objective? What's the problem you're trying to solve? So again, we're coming with a solution there to a wide thing. So what is it what's the specific thing that you're trying to do? Are you trying to get into a hairpin, or are you looking to go through a fast sweeping corner? What's the context for that?
Well, I think people hear these or search for these rules. And I know, being an engineer, I came into racing, I was like, I am going to know exactly what the optimum is, and I'm going to get really good at doing that every single time. And it doesn't seem to be a fruitful pursuit because there's so many different things that affect everything. So you can't one size fits all for every turn. So I guess that's where the
Well, so
pursuits break down.
yeah, so there is a bit of this, which is this vector G sum
Mm-hmm.
approach. Now, hopefully that's not like made everyone glaze over with that language. I don't know why they make the language so engineering-y.
They
But anyway,
watched Airplane when they were young, and they
yeah, it really doesn't make my life easy trying to explain some of this stuff.
no.
But a lot of people will be familiar with the friction circle.
Mm-hmm.
So this concept of you've got a certain amount of grip in a straight line, and you've got a certain amount of grip going left or right, and they're kind of two peaks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but you can brake and turn at the same time, but you can't do that at the peak of the braking or peak of your lateral end. So there's an arc that you scribe between the two, and that creates a kind of circle. It's more like an oval typically. But that's what people talk about, the friction circle, and say, okay, now the if you draw a line, no one can see this, can they? But if you draw a line from
There's a line.
yeah, well, that describes the arc of that friction circle, and then measure the length of it all the way around. You basically want to be sitting on the edge of this friction circle the whole time. Now, the lovely thing about it, which isn't always super obvious, well, it certainly wasn't to me when I first started looking at this, is that it doesn't matter what type of corner you're traveling around, you always want to be on the outside of that circle.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you're sort of very briefly there, or just scribing, through a fast corner, or through a sort of a slower corner hairpin, whatever, you always want to be sitting on the outside of that friction circle, and you can visualize that friction circle in your data normally with this G-sum thing,
Mm-hmm.
which combines your lateral or longitudinal acceleration, and it creates little hills, for want of a much better description. So basically, you're looking for smooth hills in your data, and if you don't have smooth hills, you can see it quite clearly, to be honest, when you know what you're looking for.
Okay.
And then you just say, well, I've not got a smooth hill through that corner, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you go with me on this, and then you can say, well, is it in the braking or is it in the steering?
Okay.
And the lateral is your steering, and the longitudinal is your braking,
Right.
or getting on the throttle. Yeah,
Yeah.
those two.
Yeah. Both.
And so you can use that as a thing, and it really does. It's got, from an engineering point of view, it's a very clean way of looking at
Mm-hmm.
the thing. There are a few assumptions that go into it,
Sure.
but as a general theory, it's a really nice, simple way of digging into your data, and you can look at, it doesn't matter what kind of track you're on, what type of corner, you always want to see the same kind of shape in this vector G trace, which is wonderful. So it simplifies the whole thing.
Okay. So I don't have to show Vicky the friction circle dots that she always says it looks like a butterfly. So
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah. I basically here's my first my 101 feeble explanation to her is, you want more of the dots as far out from the center as you can, and you want as few dots closer to the center or inside that circle, and the more relative. But I'm not sure that's actually technically the best.
Well, so if you've got you've got like a cross, so you want them up and down in the middle.
Yep.
And then you want them around the edge.
Yep.
And
try to get everything out.
Yeah.
Try to keep minimum in, and
it's tricky. Like anything, you get into the kind of, like, sometimes the topology of a track will mean that you haven't got it's, but that's the basic theory, and if you go in with that, you will start finding a lot of lap time. So if people have had sort of this kind of classic how to drive on a track education, where they're told to brake 100% in a straight line, come off the brakes, then do your turning, You can see that super clearly in the data that you're not getting the most grip out of the car.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
by looking at this thing, and then it's like, okay, we now need to introduce, trail braking and get you braking further and deeper into the corner, so you're using more of the grip that you've got, and those tires are expensive, so get the most out of them, really.
Yeah. They don't just go forward, rolling. They go side to side a bit too.
They do.
So if we were to get something equipment wise to do data, is there a minimum amount of data or sensors that you think is makes the system viable in your opinion?
Yeah, I do have an opinion on that. It's not 100% aligned with many of the engineers I've had on the show, to be honest, because they're coming from a professional world, where they have, they're not buying them for start.
They have time and money.
The minimum for me is something like an AIM Solo or an Apex Pro or something like that, where the quality, where the sensor is better than your phone. Like, you can just put your phone in the car,
sure,
and you've got accelerations and speed, and that's pretty much like the basics for what you need.
Your sample rate's really low though, right?
And then we get into sample rate systems, don't we? So so just get super nerdy straight away. It's like, we're going to talk about like hertz and all this sort of stuff. And then, so the nice thing about buying an off the shelf thing like that is you don't have to worry about it all. It's like it's good enough. The other thing another one that I use quite a lot is my GoPro. So the newer GoPros, and when I say newer, I mean, I think they're on version 10 now, and from about version 5 onwards, they've had GPS in them. So you might have seen some of the crazy videos where someone's skiing down a hill and you can see how fast they're going. The GPS and the accelerometers are within the camera, and they store it with the video. And so there's some software that you can get from a British company called Race Technology, and they've kind of taken their data analysis package and allowed you to just pull in your GoPro video. And that, whilst again it's a bit of a compromise, it's pretty good, and you get video and data together in the one thing. Another sort of step up is something like the AIM with a SmartyCam, or the Garmin Catalyst, which has come out in fairly recent, last year or so, didn't it? So those kind of tools, I would say they're kind of the minimum. My engineering friends would say, well, you need driver controls, so steering, brakes, and throttle. But we, in the amateur community, have basically used lateral and longitudinal acceleration as a alternative for having those sensors in the car. So and that's pretty good.
Okay, so let's pretend we've got people who are, well, let's not a pretend. Let's pretend we've got people who are relatively new, and when you're starting off in racing, you have a lot of things you need to get. You need to get your safety stuff. You need to get your car set up. You need lots of consumables. Some people have no tools going in. Some people have no...
The first win, and no one talks about this, the first win is just getting on the starting grid.
Exactly. That was our
just don't care what position you're in, just being on the grid is not to be taken lightly.
It's like Maslow's hierarchy of things. My first one was myself, Vicky, my wife, Liam, my son, and my son's friend, Cassie. We're at the track. And the first thing was, make sure we get to the track. I mean,
yeah.
And then the second one was, make sure everybody gets one stint. It could be 10 minutes. I don't care. We've got to get everybody in and have fun. And higher was to make sure Vicky, the family CFO and team CFO now, gets to drive the car, because if we go and spend what amount of time and money we did to get ready to this track and she doesn't get in the car, this is not going to go well for Mr. Bill. Anyway, I digress. So you're starting off racing, you're starting off a racing team. Maybe you've got an endurance racing team. Maybe you're a single driver doing time trials. It doesn't really matter. Maybe you're going to HPDs. Is there things or data that someone should collect that doesn't rely on a piece of electronic equipment? Is there stuff they should write down on a piece of paper to start generating some data for them so they can start to learn more about themselves, their progression, their cars? Is there check sheets, or is there I see a lot of people collect weather. The track was, it was 92 degrees, the track was 105,000 million degrees, and maybe it's a little different than that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, the yes is the answer. As a sort of a data nerdy kind of guy, that I would feel uncomfortable going racing without some electronic data.
Sure.
Not least because well, I feel the driver needs to have some idea of their lap time within the car.
Sure.
So, yeah, that
but sometimes you can get that through like Race Monitor or something external to the car.
They could, yeah, but you need something. You need something,
Mm-hmm.
and I know I had like years ago, I had an Alfano kind of lap timer with a beacon. So I had an infrared beacon on the pit wall, and every time you pass it,
that's kind of fun.
Yeah, so just give you some idea. Obviously, you had to remember on different track layouts to point it in the right direction. And there's always a bit of faff with technology, isn't there? But when it works, it's great. The big thing, you can't have a discussion like you've just said there without talking about tires.
Sure.
And like it's sort of more essential kit. You need a stopwatch, and you need a tire pressure gauge, and a notepad, and pencil for when so it still works when it's raining.
Yeah.
And that's your default starting kit, and purely from a, and I don't care whether you're doing HPDE, track days, racing, whatever. You have to keep on top of your tire pressures. It's not like on the road. Your tires will heat up. The pressures will change significantly on the track, and you have to be on top of it really from a firstly from a safety point of view, and then secondly from a performance point of view. And the amount of tuning and adjustment you can do purely just with tire pressures is phenomenal. So that's really the first piece of data that you need. You need to be measuring them when they're cold. Cold being before you've gone on track in the morning. Measuring them through the day after each session. Go around the car. Start off. If you're doing it yourself, have your kit somewhere handy. You're going to struggle to do tire pressures manually, so that they're like 100% correct compared to if you had something on the car that was measuring them live. But what you can do is to just be really consistent in your measurement technique, and then that can somehow alleviate some of the challenges that you have with manually measuring these things in the pits. I've got, like, as you probably know, I've got a spreadsheet that can help people.
You do
with that, which is free. They're welcome to go and grab that, and it just gives you an idea of like the process that you should go through for doing your tires. So yeah, it's quite a long answer to that question, but it's really important.
In an effort to make your answer even longer, but it doesn't just, specifically talking to the newer people entering the sport, it doesn't just matter what the pressure is, it matters what tire as well. So you need to keep track of all those details, because the pressure for Hankook RS4 could be very different than the pressure you need for your Hoosier racing slick, for
Yeah.
instance, taking extreme examples. And I don't think people fully grasp the quantitative effect that tire pressure could have. I would say it could be on a minute 30 lap, it could be seconds if of just by varying tire pressures. Is that true to your experience in some ways?
You can definitely get them wrong.
Yeah.
So there's two things with the tires. You're affecting the grip. Well, there's a few things with tires really. There's
It's tires.
See, I'm trying to stop. I'm trying to simplify stuff, I know, and then my head just goes, "Well, two's not really enough, Samir. You know, it's actually more than that." But let's start with two or three things. So you've got the grip,
Yep.
and so to get the most grip, you have to have the tire presented to the road in an evenly pressured way. I'm not going to get into sort of cambers and toe and all that sort of stuff, but notionally, the more tire surface area you have pressing on the road, the more grip you're going to have.
Sure.
And if you overinflate the tires, it's going to have a hot spot in the middle of your tire contact patch. If you underinflate it, it's going to have hot spots on the edges. In the middle won't be pressured enough, so either way you're not getting the most from your tire. So that's just grip.
Right.
And if you don't get it right, the tire will either heat up too quickly and then kind of go over. There's all sorts of different phrases that people use about when tires aren't working.
Some of
and
them
I think,
don't
and
even have
in America, I
experts.
think there's probably a whole bunch of phrases that I don't even know.
Yeah.
But basically, you get to a point where they overheat in areas, and then you lose grip.
I think in bar racing, that's typically they get greasy is the most common phrase you'll hear.
Yeah, but it's like do people call it glassy? Or no, not glassy. It's I can't remember. There's a phrase that a lot of people seem to use when they're talking about tires. Greasy. That's it. They go greasy.
Yeah.
And it's like, did they actually go greasy, or is that just another way of saying they've overheated?
I believe they are one and the same.
So yeah, and then the other challenge you've got is like you're not going to know what the pressure is to aim for,
right?
Because start with racing, it's such a big difference that no one's going to tell you. So you kind of have to find it out for yourself. I've got some suggestions. I've got like a few articles on the site and with some suggestions of tire pressures you should aim for different types of vehicle, like go-kart or a heavy car or a light car, whatever. And like you say, each tire is different. Now the other point of my second one was about the handling balance. So you've got the grip. So if I don't get the tire pressures right, I'm not going to have the grip, so I'm going to be slow. But also, if I get them mismatched front to rear, so I get the fronts right, but the back's not right, then that's going to have a car that might be more loose, to use the American phrase, or oversteery.
Oversteer, yeah.
Potentially, yeah. If the backs, because if the rears run out of grip and the fronts don't, then and then equally the other way around.
Yep.
So there's a lot in terms of car balance when it comes to tire pressures, and it's one of those things that people talk about. I call them anti-roll bars. You call them sway bars.
Same.
Yeah, or something like. And people talk about dampers, and they talk about springs, and changing all these different things toe and camber for a different grip and for handling balance and how the driver feels. But unless you got to a point where you're getting you're on top of your tire pressures, only at that point would I personally start to look at some of these other parts of the car. I mean, they are kind of interrelated. I do appreciate that, but you just need to do your best to make sure that you're making a decision on changing the rest of your car based on having got your tyres in the right window. Yeah, and the temperatures like the ultimate way of doing that. So that when you put a probe in, or even use one of those infrared ones, but the pressure is the first port of call, and it's really easy. And make sure you get a good pressure gauge.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing that the pressure will do is it'll affect the wear on the tire. So if you get it wrong, you're costing yourself tire life, and which is in essence money, not just performance. So
Yeah, I mean, people talk about tire cycles as well, heat cycles, and all sorts of different things with tires. It's lots of fun and equally boring at the same time.
yeah,
Just,
it can,
but yeah, it's just one of those things. If you do motorsport, you just need to get into tires.
yeah,
That's just a given, really. If you want to go the data route, there's some really nice stuff you can start to do with that and look at that. But that's really a step for a more advanced, or someone who's either like really into the data and they've got a budget for some of the more expensive sensors and loggers and stuff, or someone who's really looking to really optimize those tire temperatures in a very robust way. So I actually had a guy on the podcast who called Claude Roel is his name, and he's quite well known in the engineering world, and certainly with students, because he's a Formula student judge, and he runs this big consultancy and stuff. And he said like, I just wouldn't know. Bearing in mind he's been in motorsports for 30 years, designs his own cars, all that sort of stuff. He says to me, I wouldn't know where to go. I wouldn't contemplate going racing without having a tyre pressure monitoring system on the car. So that's how important it can be when you're really looking at that top end. But
yeah,
from a practical point of view, getting you going today, just get that pressure gauge, notepad, stopwatch.
okay. So again, we're running out of time. I will blend in some of our pre-conversation as best I can. So I have a limited window. If you were to, the take-home message for an amateur driver, be they HPDE, time trials, endurance, and you were to say the data that you should look at and try to analyze, would be what for their use?
So the big thing is to again, so the data solving problem, right? So let's
What
put
problem,
that in a
right?
framework. And I think that's an important message to get across. Like, so don't like, I've bought the data now. What am I looking for? It's
Right.
the other way around. It's like, I have a problem. How can the data help me? So you lead the investigation, and by you as a driver. So it's like, well, I feel through turn 3 that I'm getting excessive understeer. What does the data say? What is going on? So you start owning that conversation rather than looking for the data to be some kind of instructor. You become, try and get yourself so that you're confident in your own ability and say, actually, my feelings are valid as well. So that's a really subtle but important piece in there, and just to be open-minded about what this stuff can do, because everyone can improve and everyone can learn and get better. And when you first start out, certainly like in my case, I already thought I was quite good, and I qualified last, like in my race, and I was a bit upset about that. Because I thought I was alright, and you just think, right, okay, that's a bit humbling. So how do I get better? And so you take that on as a positive challenge, and you go, right, okay, well, and small wins, and see what I can do to improve. So does that?
It does. It's you can't. You have to have a question to answer, and you have to have. I guess next time we'll get into exactly what to do to answer, and I think the important thing that we need to be cognizant of is that you don't have to, because I see a lot of people in the paddock they're like data pursuers. They want to go see what this driver did in their car, so they can try to mimic the
monkey see
data
monkey.
trace.
Yeah.
But that's not really where I think we should be trying to get to. We should be trying to teach or learn so that we get better, so we don't have to, mimic another driver's performance. We can actually find out what our performance is.
I mean, one thing we haven't talked about, and
we have lots of things we haven't talked about, sir.
Yeah, it's true. But in terms of data and a thing, we haven't talked about feedback and logging your own impressions of what's happened as a driver. And I think that's a really good habit to get into from the beginning. Mm-hmm. It does feel like admin at the time, and you want to get out of the car and just go and talk to your mates and have fun. But the value of being able to sort of download your mind before you've spoken to anyone is, make some notes on a track map and just think about what's going on in the car. Where did you struggle and where did you not struggle? And that's super important. And the one thing to, a whole bunch of stuff on the site about how to do that. But briefly, the idea is to break the corner down into the entry, the mid phase, and the exit. Mm-hmm. And when you start, really, in my humble opinion, the focus is the exit. A lot of people all focused on the entry because that's the terrifying bit. Yes. But really, the speed is going to come from the exit, and then you work backwards, to the entry. And so, well, what can I do on the entry to make sure I get a good exit? Mm-hmm. And this sort of stuff starts to become second nature in the end. But whatever you, it's a chain reaction. So whatever you do on the entry limits your options all the way through the corner. Okay, so you want to get your entry right, but equally, what does right mean? Well, right means I've got a good exit. Mm-hmm. And what can I do to carry 1 mile an hour more through the corner, through the exit? These are the kind of little things you start to get into when you're really finding the absolute limit of your car. It's like, okay, now where do I go? How do I get even quicker? It's like, well, how do I carry 0.5 mile an hour, 1 mile an hour more through the exit, through the mid phase? What do I have to do on the entry to do that? Mm-hmm. And your track notes will tell you. So it'll be like, something you can refer back to when you're next at that track, because we don't always race at the same place. So, do you cut a curb? Do you not cut the curb? What do you feel worked for your car? What was your, what gears were you in for each corner, for example? That's a good starting point. So, all these, as many notes as you can make that mean something to you. I've got a coaching client at the moment, and he hates writing stuff down. So we're going to trial him doing like a video download instead. Mm-hmm. So basically, he'll just film himself talking me around the lap, and just as a record of what is in his mind before he's spoken to anyone. So hopefully those tips are useful for people to try.
Well, I first off, I want to thank you for coming on again. Second off, in that last little summary, 4 or 5 minutes, I have a whole nother episode of the podcast, so you're stuck coming back again, because it's just like, oh yeah, I gotta ask about that. But anyway, so until we have part 3, Samir, for people looking to get some of the more information that you have available, or if they're looking to follow along, what would be the best ways for them to see what you and your data-driven enterprise are up to?
Yeah, so yourdatadriven.com and analysiscoach.com are the two main places you can find more information about me. Yourdatadriven.com one is, you can get links there to the podcast, to articles, spreadsheets, and the online courses. So, you're very welcome to pop in there. I do a weekly newsletter as well, so sign up to that so you get all the latest stuff. And, we're just trying to grow this thing, help people go faster, have more fun.
And you do. And we are. And we thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, buddy.
it's on my to-do list to dip into the world of setup.
Ooh, I don't know.
Yeah,
Doodle
yeah,
about that.
yeah.
When they start talking roll centers, my eyes just glaze over. I'm like, what are you talking about? I have books. I haven't gotten to read them yet. I've got 2 sitting over there that are plaguing me right now.
It it gets complicated really quickly.
It does.
So
I need the 101 course before I do the full, setting up a race car and what is that? I'm looking at
yeah.
my shelf right now. Unfortunately it's down in the garage. It's the this guy had a series of books that he wrote like probably in the 70s or 80s.
Mm.
I think it's Carol or something like that, but it's like how to set up a race car. And it's supposed to be like the Bible, and I'm looking at it going, I flipped the pages and I'm like, oh, this looks like school.
I think the challenge, one of the challenges is to work out like what does good look like. What are you really aiming for?
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of depends on the type of car you've got, and
Sure.
you know. But yeah, so the setup thing is definitely an area I'm tackling. I'm also looking at the next step in the data course, so more of an intermediate
Mm-hmm.
level course. So where from that beginner's course, so where do we go next? And at the end of
Yeah.
it, I show like a little hierarchy of kind of going a bit crazy. But let's cover the next bit, and I think that's really really quite powerful. That next piece around looking at the sort of vector G stuff, and it effectively pulls everything together with a lot more on that next level, really. And
Well, if I look
so
at the
that's super exciting because it really does. It if people aren't familiar with that, then that approach it really does. Finally, you're able to look at everything to do with the driving and say, yeah, this is how to improve it. So the course is for sure. I mean, I've done a whole bunch of calculators and spreadsheets recently. You've probably seen. So
I have bought several.
yeah, I've got some updates on those actually coming out this week. So you'll get a free upgrade really on those.
No worries.
So yeah, so it's probably worth mentioning those bits and pieces. But
Okay.
yeah,
It-
yeah, the podcast. I've got a backlog of them to edit. I
that's
think I've
always
got
fun.
five to do.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about how many I have to edit right now. Oh my goodness. I just
Okay.
added to the first one.
Oh, there's more. Okay.
There's always more. We have lots of more. So I just shared
Have
you
to stay
another one.
warm in minus 15 degrees.
Well, you have nothing else to do, but you might as well stay inside and write out podcast outlines, right? So, did it come through yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bill Wings an intro.
Yep,
Good work.
that's the how we start every podcast. I don't know if wings carries over across the pond, but that means just kind of winging it. Just don't make anything. No preparation. Just try to go. So I was looking at.
Wow. Okay. I needed
I,
to have read.
I was looking at skip down to the reddish area.
Yeah. Okay. So it's all kind of car setup-y stuff. Oh, layers one time.
Well, data. Like, how do you use data? Like, the first level to me is like lap time, and then the second level would be like sector times, and then
Yeah.
I took a guess at some of the farther.
Well, I should ask you. I mean, you've done the course, haven't you? So you should be like, I could challenge you to
I have
because
to represent the audience, which may or may not have taken your course.
but yeah, but you can see. I say actually that might be quite interesting because it's like that's my suggestion. Like, so the idea of the course is that I don't just throw
No.
concepts at you. I give you a framework, and then you hang your own stuff on it, and I
Mm-hmm.
give you a suggestion of what you should put on there
Yep.
to get going. But
Right.
the idea is that like it's like a bigger picture thing. It's like why are we even doing this?
Yes. And then
No one ever talks about that bit.
Well, no one ever talked. It's kind of like you do what you should do, and you try to do the best practice, but nobody really gets into what to do, and then, well, not. I mean, you have, but some people will get into what to do, but nobody ever gets into a really amount of why, and then what to do with it after you have all this pile of
Yeah.
information. And it's just kind of, okay, I took it all. Well, if you don't use it, you know why?
Yeah.
And some of it's like handwritten notes. Like everybody's like, I took a course, just a short little course. They had Andrew Rains and Eric Meyer. Andrew Rains from
Oh, great. Yeah. How was that?
it was good. It was on track maps, and there wasn't anything groundbreaking, but there was like 3 or 4 things that I never thought about putting onto a track map note. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that's better. But
Yeah. I
you
quite
know
like that what they did there with the I only saw the preview thing, but the like on the like just planning out overtake. This is our show, by the way. You know that.
no, we haven't even
Planning
started
out the overtake, planning the overtakes on the map.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's quite clever. That's like a really good thing. It's like and you
Yeah.
do it in your head, but you don't when you actually draw it out. It's like, yeah, actually, that's a good thing to try. It's
Yeah,
another new idea.
I forgot the track name because they all kind of blend together. The F1 track, the new one that they just built, it's on the coast. You could tell that Lewis Hamilton had figured out that he's going to pass everybody going onto that last turn onto the front straightaway, or the main straightaway. And he did it like every single. It was the one where he went from like 20th to first.
The Brazil one, the Brazil.
No, maybe it wasn't Brazil. It was the new one, but you could just see that he set everybody up so he'd always catch them right there, and he'd get the DRS and he'd just zoom right by, and another one down, and it was like every
Well,
lap he
the
passed them.
Saudi one, he did.
It could be,
Saudi, but-
Saudi. Yeah, I want to say it was in the Middle East, but I just don't remember. I've got the
Yeah.
ball on my DVR, but anyway, you want to get rolling, sir? You have any time you need to get out of town?
Yeah, I've got till 3 local time, so that's about 45 minutes, something
All
like
right,
that.
so very well. So I'll blend some of what we already talked about into it. So we'll figure that out. So did you listen to Ross's latest podcast yet? With
With Jeff?
yeah, the second version. He's got a second
Oh
one out.
no, I saw the first one I got.
Yeah, the second one just came out last week, and it made me realize we're still at a level in our. If you need to go, we can.
No, I'm good. I'm good actually. Yeah.
Okay, we're at a level where we are so focused on our self-improvement as drivers,
Yeah.
we don't worry about anything that the car has to do with anything.
Yeah.
It's like a black box. We drive the black box and we try to improve ourselves, assuming that we're the problem. And Ross's and Jeff's discussion was feedback from the driver, even if it's to yourself, on what the car could do to be better. We don't even think about that knob. It's like, get in car, set tire pressures to where we think they traditionally are for that track, and drive. And anything that's wrong is us. And we're going to have a segment on that coming up soon, because it was just like, oh yeah, I guess we should graduate to that level of thinking, and we just haven't. It was a great 18 minutes.
It's but it takes confidence, doesn't it, to dive into that world? And
It's not me, really. Maybe it is.
well, it is you, but it's also like, how do you? So the idea of the car is to it's got 2 jobs. It's got to like generate the most grip in all circumstances, and then the second job is to do that in a way that gives you confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not necessarily mutually exclusive or competing against each other, but sometimes they can.
Yep.
So the challenge is then to look at what you can change on your car that will, and what can you tune on your car? Like, what can you actually? So, like a Formula One car, they can tune
Everything.
a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And they can do it between corners. So on your car, you're not going to have the same level of tunability. So what can you do? Everyone can do tyres, fine. But then from working up, what can you do?
Right.
Can you adjust the alignment of the wheels? Can you look at this? Change the stiffness. Can you change the shock absorber stiffnesses and the valving on those? What is it that can you do? Can you raise and lower the ride height? Can you change this? Yeah, and all of these things will start to both affect the potential grip, but also affect your confidence.
Yes.
And it's a bit frustrating. It's like, so if we didn't talk about the sim racing, but that's something you could do in the sim racing, is to play around with the setup and see what difference it makes. Because sometimes you can change the car, and as the driver doesn't feel any different, and yet you go like a second quicker,
right,
or more, right? And the car doesn't feel any different at all. And other times you change the car feels like terrifying, and you're slow, or it feels like it's going to kill you at every moment. And then you sort of like, okay, well, how do I dial it so it's away from that? And so the sim is quite a nice place to play, and there's normally quite a lot of things you can change on the car. So and because it's a sim, it only takes a click. Change the spring rates, click, done. Right, let's go try. Yeah, what I mean. It's not like half a day's worth of effort and resetting the car. Faffing around with changing real springs. So, I think there's again, like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? I want more grip and I want confidence in the car. They're the two things they're measures of success. Because the more grip will give you more lap time potential, right? And confidence will give you more lap time potential. So they're the two. Yeah. They're the two areas. They're the two measures of success. Like, well, what can I change on the car? What can I change in me to optimize that so we actually go quicker? And it's massive amount of stuff in there.
Yeah, and I think our default assumption was always that we aren't good at driving, and some of us are getting to the point where we're decent, or not good like on the level that the people that you worked with are good, but for an amateur, we're getting to decent. And the other thing is that we're typically competing in a team environment, so we can't have a car that's perfect for me, because Vicky and Jen typically would think that car is too loose and scary. So we need to kind of make it to the best middle position for everybody. And the biggest one that we learned last season, right at the end of the season, was that the driver's seat position impacts Vicky and Jennifer specifically more than we had acknowledged. Because what I did was that we made one team race where it was an all-female team. So we made it so that Vicky and Jen, being the tallest, they were 5'7", that was fully back. And then we had one girl who was sub 5 foot, so she was all the way front. And what we did was we raised the seat so that the shortest lady could see well. And then Jennifer and Vicky were like, "Oh my God, I can see now." And they didn't know, and they didn't realize. And because I like sitting low, but I've got a taller torso. So now we've spent I don't know how many days trying to get the seating position right for both, so that I still fit safely, but yet Jennifer and Vicky specifically can see as best they can, because we've changed the rake of the slider, so that as they go forward, and we've changed the position in and out of the car, so that towards the center line of the car, so that they can see a bit better, because the pillars, the A pillars, were impacting them a lot from where they were sitting, and it didn't really bother the gentleman in the car. So it was so
ergonomics and driver comfort are not something that engineers typically place value on. And yet, if you talk to someone like Jeff or Ross, they will just say it's ridiculously important. because the problem is that
we didn't realize how much,
it's the confidence, isn't it? It's that. So what can we? So that's the problem, right? So and like you're trying to solve is like give the driver more confidence. What can they see where they're going?
It'd be nice.
yes, then you're going to be more confident. It's uh, can you
Especially,
place the car exactly where you want? Well,
yeah,
no, because I can't see because the April is in the way.
yeah,
It's like, well,
a minor detail. And then the other thing is we're typically doing in 2 to 2.5 hour stints.
yeah,
So the ability to have proper leg alignment to the pedal so that you're not holding your leg up to
oh
brake,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, or some people don't see the significance of a dead pedal. You can wear yourself out just by poor, not optimal ergonomics, and we've noticed that.
it's the there's so many like costs, like energy costs,
Mm-hmm.
like the kind of the wrinkle in the sock
Yep.
analogy. It's like
Exactly.
it's not the end of the world. It's just a wrinkle in the sock, but it's really distracting,
Mm-hmm.
and that's burning energy that you could be using, cognitive energy that you could be using for something else,
Yep.
i.e., driving.
Yep.
And particularly for an endurance event, it's very tiring.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be making the car as easy as possible to drive,
For sure.
very forgiving, and um, easy to place. It's
Mm-hmm.
just the whole thing. You just want it to be
Yep.
like quite a low effort to drive it. Really,
Yeah.
the problem is that if you go too far, then it won't be very fast. So it's just trying to find that balance. But that's why things like power steering and things like that. That people might rip out because it's heavy
Lose
or whatever.
weight.
Yeah. You've got to suit the car to your event, haven't you? So
Yeah. Yeah, and it really is a big deal when you're in like your third stint of the weekend on Sunday. When it's getting close to the end of the race, and you're looking at you're getting towards 7-8 hours for the weekend, and
yeah,
we're amateur shape as well as physical shape.
yeah,
So anything you can do to make it a little bit better, it's easier and it's safer, and usually it ends up being faster too. So
yeah. I mean, you want your metric really isn't lap time, apart from pole or whatever,
yeah,
and whatever value that means. I don't know if you have points or anything for that, but
no,
the but your metric is really average stint time. So
we tend to do non-yellow
Yeah,
lap average and standard deviation.
yeah,
I tend to like this because you've got traffic too. So 140 cars on the track, you're not going to get a perfect lap. So
no,
I try to our inherent target is like plus or minus 2 seconds ish
yeah,
or close,
that's
and
good.
try to, because traffic is we'll have a 2.2 mile track with 140 cars.
Yeah, that's a
So
lot.
yeah, so your plus or
And
minus is not
and
tense.
it depends on what you're in the middle class, aren't you, as well? So
Yeah,
you're like
usually
being passed, if I
both.
remember.
Yep. Yep.
So that's a pain. It's
Yeah.
kind of
I will say when we're in the top class, it's a whole lot more fun, but we're working on it.
yeah, but
We
that's
do.
something else to think about, isn't it? So can everyone see out? Okay. Um, I had a good tip from Ross the other day about the mirror positions
Mm-hmm.
of just putting it out like ever so slightly more
Yep. More.
than when you're sitting there and like and
Can't see the edge of your car.
where you see the side of the car. So
Yeah.
don't do that. Put it
Don't do
further
that.
out,
Yep.
and then move your head out.
Yeah.
Um,
The
because
other
that
one that we do,
reduces your blind spot.
your rear view mirror. I don't know if you're using if you're driving a normal road car like we do, they have the standard, let's say it's 25 centimeters or so
Yeah,
width. We buy a larger one that's like, I think it's like 40 centimeters or so, and it's concave.
yeah,
But we don't just mount it in the same spot. We actually move it over towards the passenger side
yeah.
so that you see less helmet and you can actually see behind yourself. And we find that gives you a wider field of view.
yeah. So I ran. I don't know if you can.
Yep, I see that one.
You can maybe see.
Yep. Yep.
Can you see it?
Yep. Yep.
It's like, unfortunately, for me, that didn't work. because it ended up just like, if you look at the roll bar at the back.
Oh, you're at a cross. Yeah.
And it ended up just looking at the middle of that. So I've changed it now to a pillar type one.
Okay, the little spot mirrors.
Like that one. Can you see it? It's on the dash.
Okay, yeah.
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 It's a pillar type thing. So like an old Group C open top kind of car, something like that. But that works better for me. But again, it's concave as well, so you can see.
Get the angle.
Yeah, it's a thing. You know, you need to be like. One of my mechanics is like, oh, you don't need bloody mirrors. Just look forward. Just look forward.
What's behind you has already been done with.
Yeah, exactly. That's not your problem. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's just it's what's coming at you that's important. Yeah. And he kind of had a point, but equally, yeah, in our racing, you need a mirror. So got to be able to defend. So
I think that's spoken like a mechanic who doesn't do body work.
He races though. He races himself. He's quite good.
Is he?
But I think he was just making the point of.
Yeah.
I think a lot of a lot of the drivers he see, they drive in the mirror. They're looking in the mirror too much and it slows them down. And I think that's probably something that you guys should be like sensitive to.
Yep, we are.
Because you end up just driving in the mirror. And sometimes his point is, let's just forget about it and go. You want to be going forwards, not not backwards. So, yeah, it's about their mindset more than the equipment.
It's really a big deal over here with the HPD groups because you don't want to be the guy or the girl on the track that holds everybody up because you have limited passing zones typically in an HPD. Yeah. So the especially the newer students, when I'm instructing with them, I'll tell them, listen, you're only allowed to pass in certain spots, and I will take care of your mirrors. You focus on your driving, and I will tell you when we need to let somebody by. Otherwise, don't even look at the mirror.
I love this HPD thing. I was talking to the Garmin people, and they're like, "Why don't you have it in the UK?" It's like, yeah, we don't have it. I don't know if it's insurance or no one's thought of it or something, but it's just not a thing. And because by the sound of it, it's everything the same as racing apart from racing.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Because on our track days, you're not allowed to like have lap timing on. So it's kind of like, what? It's just literally just an experience to drive your car around on a track. So it's not meant to be competitive. But the nice thing about the HPD, therefore, is it sits in the middle. You are trying to be competitive, but basically just with yourself. And
so it's kind of a ladder system where you work your way up and eventually you get to comp school or racer school, whatever you want to call it. Or you can go to a racing school and do it. And it's just one of the two ways typically that you get to be a wheel-to-wheel competitive race car driver here.
Yeah. It's we definitely miss out. Hopefully we'll address that in the future.
It may be a market opportunity for you, sir.
It's not for me. It's not something I'm going to go and do.
True.
I've got enough backlog of things that I'm not getting done. No. Although I have just bought a track day car.
Did you?
Yeah, I need to. I haven't like announced it properly yet, but so the idea is to the idea wasn't to do anything with work with it, but then someone said, well, why don't you just do something in that too, because there's a lot of track day drivers who are in your audience and stuff. So so the idea is like, how do you what are the decisions you make from having a stock car to a track car or a car that you would track. So being an engineer, I've had to go away and think of a metric that's not lap time, because that's not the only metric for a track day car.
Sure.
So I've come up with it's like a smiles metric. So it's
miles per miles is how we call it.
Miles per mile, yeah. So it's miles per mile or miles per pound or whatever, yeah. And So it doesn't really matter if it makes it quicker or not. Doesn't make you happy, and yeah. So that's another sort of thing. So it'd be interesting to see where that goes. Something slightly different. But,
Cool. Well, we look forward to everything we ever get from you, and we will bother you again, sir.